All right. Welcome and thank you for watching our video. This is our presentation on effective note-taking, and we are the Student Disability Services Office and the Technique Center here at Texas Tech University. So let's get started. So I'm just going to let us all introduce ourselves, starting with Mackenzie, and then we'll all just kind of explain who we are.
So my name is Mackenzie. I'm an administrator and academic counselor in Student Disability Services. And we know how important note-taking is in the classroom, so we're really hoping this will be a helpful resource for you.
And I'm Tisha. I'm also an administrator and an academic counselor at the Student Disability Services Office.
Hello, my name is Lauren Ronahan, and I am a master tutor at the Technique Center.
Great, let's get started.
So we're going to talk about some objectives that we hope to get out of this presentation. We'll talk about a little bit about the transition from high school to college and the differences there, why notes are important, several different note-taking styles that can fit your learning style and can fit depending on what class you're taking, I think, and some general note-taking tips as well. So transitioning from high school to college, high school teachers may often provide you notes, while university professors may expect you, and probably a lot of times will expect you to take your own notes in the classroom. High school teachers oftentimes discuss or mix discussions with in-class work and kind of go alongside each other. University professors may lecture for an entire class period. High school teachers may expect you to copy from the board, while university professors may expect you to write only important points. And that's kind of hard to distinguish sometimes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Why note-taking is important. So note-taking is very important because it provides a written record of the main points and supporting details of a class. They are your guideline to review later, oftentimes for exams. Exam material will come from the lecture and notes many times from class. So those notes are really important and like a guideline. Notes also engage you and keep your mind alert. If you are participating in class, if you're being active and taking notes, you'll also find that they will help you learn, and research shows that writing down notes helps us to retain the material. So some general note-taking tips before we get started. Diving into general note-taking styles, the first one would be to be prepared for class. So that can include doing your reading, knowing what's on the syllabus. Sometimes your professor will have you print some materials that you need before the class, and having those ready and at your disposal will be really helpful to be ready for class and ready to take notes. The little things, I think, make up the big things. So things like arriving to class on time is really important because you don't want to miss any important aspects of the class. Sometimes announcements are made at the beginning of the class, and you don't want to miss those things either. It's important to choose a seat that is optimal for your learning style. Some students may find that sitting in the front is really optimal for their learning style to kind of mitigate distractions behind them. Some may find that sitting in the front is absolutely not optimal for their learning style. So knowing yourself and knowing how you learn best is really important while you're here. Take care of yourself. It's really hard to be attentive whenever you're super tired, whenever you're hungry, thirsty. So taking care of your basic needs will help you be successful in the classroom. And finally, have a positive mindset. Choosing to go into a class with a positive mindset and willing to learn will go a long way in your classes and in taking notes. So we're going to go over several different note-taking styles. Tisha and Lauren are going to talk about those. We've got Cornell Notes, box method versus mind map, outline format, PDF printout, Sq4r, and creating shorthand.
Awesome. So I'll go first. I'll talk about the Cornell Note method. So on this page, you can see an image on the left. This is an example that I just drew out myself of the Cornell method. So this method is, it was created by Walter Pock from obviously Cornell University. And it comes from How to Study in College, 7th edition, from 2001. So if you were to Google best types of notes to take in college, Cornell Notes is going to come up most of the time. It's a really, really popular one. And here's why. So the idea behind the Cornell note-taking method is that when you're in lecture and you're listening, you should be actively listening. So in order to prep yourself to use this Cornell method, here's what you need to do. You can see the image on the left. I've divided up my page into several sections. So of course I have a title up top, and then I've divided my columns with 2.5 inches on the left for the cue column and 6 inches on the right for the note-taking column. My margins were not set up like this originally, so I did have to do a bit of prep work, but here's how you actually use that to your advantage. So in the note-taking column, this is probably what you think about when you take notes, right? So you're listening and you're taking notes. Every new idea should be on a new line. One thing that the Cornell note-taking method kind of stresses is you want to be efficient with your notes. So you want to use telegraphic sentences. So instead of writing a whole paragraph in the note-taking section, use shorter abbreviations or things that will help you remember without writing every single word down that your professor says. That's taking more of an active listening approach. On the left-hand side, this is where you're going to have your cue column. So the cue column is for things like questions, things like keywords. You might be wondering, well, why would I do that? When I normally take notes, I don't ever include questions. I don't ever include keywords from the lecture. Well, again, this is trying to help you have an active role in your learning and not just be passively sitting back. So the questions that you might be wondering are things like, is there anything you're curious about? It might be, is there anything that the professor mentioned might be on a test? Keywords could include, are there definitions that you think are important? Are there main concepts that you want to highlight? And the way that you can use cueing or this cue column to your advantage is when you go to study for your lecture, let's say you have a test or a quiz coming up, or you just really want to know the information, what you can do is you can cover up the note-taking column and you can look at the cue column and you ask yourself the questions. And if you can say it, then you remember it. You can look at the keywords. Do the keywords jostle your memory? Are you able to remember what you learned in the lecture? And if you can say it, then you know it. You're understanding the material, which is what we want. Then at the bottom there, you'll see that I have divided about 2 inches, I've dedicated about 2 inches to the summary tab. So the summary tab is exactly what it sounds like. At the end, after you're looking at your page, you're reviewing your lecture notes, your summary should be kind of a brief overview of what you went over. And this method, while it might take some time to prep, is a really good one that you can use right in lectures. Most lectures are going to be conducive for this. It's helpful because it's actually quite efficient. A lot of people find that when they take notes, they're missing a lot of information, and then they try and study for exams and they're not really sure what they even wrote in their notes, like what they aren't sure what it says, and they're not really able to use them to study. So in this case, this is actually an efficient way to take notes and also create somewhat of a study guide for quizzes and exams if you use it in that way.
Alrighty, so up next is going to be the box method versus the mind map. To the left, it's going to be a picture of the box method, which involves boxes and putting all of your topics and ideas into those boxes. And to the left of that is going to be an image of a mind map, having a central idea going out to subtopics and then going into little pieces of information about those subtopics. So with box method and mind method, it is possible to use these right in lecture, but we would recommend it for a rewriting technique. Normally, both of them are going to pull information that you went over in class, create connections between the two, and it's going to be great for more of our visual learners. We'll start with the box method. So the box method of taking notes is a relatively newer concept that was created specifically for digital note takers. However, you are able to adapt it a little bit to be specifically for paper and pen. It's a method that separates out the main ideas and the sub-arguments and is helpful for smaller clusters of information. Both of these options are great for visual learners. Now going over to the mind map. It is also great for visual learners, but it's more focused on the conceptual structure of the information itself, creating connections between the two ideas. It's very useful for problem solving, summarizing information, and clearly presenting topics and subtopics. So as you can see in the box method, there is a little bit of color, but it's mostly just to outline the information. Most of it is going to be just writing in, separating out those by color, but we're more focused on the information. The mind map is going to be completely colorful. You're able to be super aesthetic with it. And it's great for those people who like to doodle, because your doodling can actually engage your mind and you're actively learning through those doodles. In our examples, I chose household chores. So we have our main topic of household chores, but then our subtopics of washing dishes, cleaning the floors, and making the beds. So with our box method, you can see that all of those are going to be different titles, and we have steps listed out underneath, different types of information for the box method. And then for the mind map method, it's still going to be separated out into all of those different colors, but it's going to be more of a visual aspect. Mind maps can get super large. It really just depends on what you are looking to do and the information that you are looking to put into the map.
Awesome. Next, I'm going to do the outline method. So this method is actually one that I primarily used in the later years of my college. I originally started, like most freshmen, not really knowing how to take notes, but I kind of got into a groove and found that the outline method really worked for me. There is a lot of differing opinions on whether taking handwritten notes is better or taking typed notes is better. And I found that the outline method, when I typed it out, just worked really well for a lot of the courses that I took. So on this page, you're going to see two images. So on the left, you see kind of a general outline method. So I include like a title and some main points. And then on the right, I have some more specific examples. So the information that I got on the right is from that reference below. So it's from the Texas Tech University, just some information about Texas Tech's founding and the current stats that I wanted to highlight to give you more of an example of what the outline method is. So this is kind of an intuitive example or an intuitive way of note taking. The idea behind it is that you're trying to, while in lecture, figure out what the main points are and maybe the subpoints of what the professor is saying. So here are some tips and tricks to use the outline method. Number one, you should pick a system and be consistent with the system. So you'll see on the left, on my just generic example, every time I start a main point, I make it with Roman numerals. So I have, Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, differentiating between the main points. And then to differentiate between the subpoints, I include letters. So you see A, B, C. And then something I chose to differentiate between a subpoint and just details is just a dash or a bullet point. And you can be a little bit flexible. If you don't like Roman numerals because they're kind of hard to keep track of, you can use numbers or letters instead. That's not a big deal. Another thing that you want to keep track of is the indentation. So the indentation is also supposed to mean something. So you'll see that on the furthest left, that's where all our main points show up. But as you learn more about the main points and you have more, subpoints, the professor's expanding on a topic, you're going to see it drive more indented to the right. So this can kind of help you as you're looking back on your notes and trying to differentiate between what, the main objectives of the lecture were and what details go with what main points. So something that I wanted to mention is this tends to be a really good option, at least for me when I was in like social science classes. When I was in a lecture and I could tell very easily what the professor was talking about in terms of like main points, this was a very easy method for me to use. So if you have professors that use things like, today we're going to be going over 5 major texts in the English language, and you know that those are the main points you're going to be following, that's a great time to use the outline method. To give you more of an example, on the right, you'll see a handwritten outline method that I've done, based off of the Texas Tech's website. So let me just kind of give you an overview of what I've done. So of course, we have the title up top with the date. The date is very important. So when you're flipping through your notes, you can remember what day you wrote it on. And then you'll see my main points included Texas Tech's founding and then Texas Tech's current statistics. So as far as the founding, I included things like when it was created, when Tech was opened. In terms of details, I included what was Tech's original name and when did it, and what was the original enrollment of Texas Technical College. And then when we get into the second main point, Texas Tech's current statistics, I included things like how many students enrolled, how many national merit finalists we had in fall 2020, how many colleges and schools we had. So you can see that by using the outline method, as I look back at my notes, I can clearly see in an organized way what the main points that the professor was lecturing on were, and what were some subpoints and what were some details.
Up next is going to be the PDF printout method. This is going to be my most used method so far in college. It works great for classes that actually have lecture notes or lecture slides. It does not really work out as well for a discussion-based class because there are no PowerPoint slides to really work off of. To the right is a picture of a dishwashing poster by the Labor Law Compliance Center. If any of y'all have worked in food service, you are probably very deeply familiar with this printout. So up at the top, we have dishwashing by hand, which associates back to the box method and the mind map that we were using earlier. And down below is dishwashing by machine. So in these, I highlighted the main subtopics of the dishwashing by hand, which can be considered to be details, or it could be considered to be the subtopics, depending on what you were really looking at and what your professor was looking for. I circled information that I thought would be important. So scraping all the plates and napkins into the trash, putting the dishes into a mixture of the dish soap and the hot water, not just doing one or the other. Stacking the dishes to start them drying once they have all been rinsed off, and cleaning them with a dry cloth for dry dishes. You don't want to dry them off with a wet cloth. For PDF printout, it involves printing out the notes for class or downloading them onto an electronic device that you take notes on ahead of time. It allows you to review the material before class, make additional notes of instructor emphasis, and not have to scramble to write everything down. A lot of times in college, professors go a mile a minute, it seems like, and having the information already there, written down for you or printed out for you can really help you to take time, actively engage and listen for what the professor emphasizes of, he's said this word multiple times, maybe this will be on the test, highlight it or drag it off to the side and make a note. PDF printout is going to be good for those more discussion-based classes that also include the lecture components. You are able to use it with a math class, doing math problems out to the side, depending on how large you print it out onto the sheet of paper, or if your note-taking app or device allows you to take notes to the side. But that may be something to be cautious of, is if it's just math or if it's just purely discussion with no lecture slides, this may be something that does not really work out for you.
Awesome. Next, I'm going to go over the Sq4r method. So this is another really popular method, but it's actually not one you'd want to use for lectures. You'd likely use this when you're doing readings. So a really common thing that I hear is students trying to figure out what the best way to read textbooks or novels are when they're taking a class. Sometimes students will come with a their textbook and they get their highlighter out or their pen out, and anytime they think something's important, they just highlight it, and then they look at their textbook after they've finished their reading and they notice the whole page is yellow. So this is maybe an alternative that's maybe a bit more efficient than that system. So the Sq4r method was created by Francis Robinson. So I'm citing his effective study book, 4th edition from 1970, to talk about what this method is. So the idea behind this method is kind of like the Cornell method in lectures. When you're trying to read a textbook, you should be actively engaged in what you're reading. You should be trying to be curious, having outside thought about what you're reading, and not just sitting back and passively skimming the text. So let's talk about the steps of the Sq4r method. The first step is to survey. So when you see survey, you probably think that's skimming, and you're right. But how it looks is you want to start, chronologically, you'll start with the titles. You'll look at the titles, you'll look at the headings, you'll look at image and image descriptions on the text. And you'll also look at important things like, sometimes colored boxes with summaries, or sometimes there's summaries at the end of the chapter. When you're doing the survey step, this is where you're kind of getting an overall idea of what the chapter in the textbook is likely going to be talking about. The next thing you can do is question. So this is where you're trying to get curious about what you're reading and be intentional about maybe why what you're reading is important. So some things that you could question include, you can ask the who, what, when, where, and why questions. Maybe you see a title and you're curious about, when did that event occur? Or why is that theory relevant to my field of study? Your questions really could be about anything related to the text, and they're important because you'll come back to them and try to answer them yourself. The next step is reading. So again, you'll want to read chronologically. So if you're reading chapter 1, start at page 1 and finish at page 13, or whenever chapter 1 ends. You're going to want to read image descriptions. Some people, when they read textbooks, this is the only step that they complete. But what makes this, process a little bit more special is if you read after already surveying, so you have an idea of what the text is about, and questioning, so you're already curious, it's easier for you to be engaged with what you're reading and feel like it's more relevant to your learning. Then the next step is to recite. So you might be wondering, well, what are you supposed to recite? So you could be reciting things like, if you have answers to your questions, you could recite those. If you have keywords that are really important, or key definitions or key topics, things that you want to remember, that's where you can recite it. It helps to not only read and to write, but also to say or teach yourself the material. That can help the information really stick. The next thing is to record. So when you record, that's you writing things down, right? So you can write down the answers to your questions. You can write down maybe test questions you think might come up based off of the reading. You can write down key ideas that you think you're really going to need to know in order to understand the material in the class. And then the last step is review. So you can review this material right after you finish. You can review this material right before an exam or a quiz. By reviewing the material, you're helping jostle your brain to remember what you've been learning. So I have prepared an example. So let's go to the next slide, where we can kind of look at how we could use this in action. So you'll see on the left, I have just a screenshot of the SDS website. So the Student Disability Services Office here at Texas Tech University, we have a whole page on some of the events that we had previously in the semester. So you'll see the reference there at the bottom. You'll see, this is a page describing things that happen from August to October. So the first thing I'm going to do when I look at this website is survey. So I'm going to read the headings. I see some dates. I see some titles. Then I'm going to question. So what are you curious about? So, one event we had was Deaf Bingo. That might be something you're curious about. What is that? Who can come? Maybe the art gallery. What does the art gallery entail? What can I bring? Does it cost money? Then I'm going to read sequentially. So I'll start at the top and I'll read all the way to the bottom. Then I'll repeat some important information. So if I was having a test on the dates coming up, maybe I'd recite the dates. Okay, August 17th, that's the open house. R is where I answer my own questions. So I could write it down on a sticky note or beside the text, or in a notebook where I could answer my questions. I could write down key dates and important information. And then R, review, that's when I'd study this information. So if I were to have an exam on this, that's where I would look back at my notes. I look back at what I recorded and I try and review this information so it could be fresh in my mind. So that is the Sq4r method.
Alrighty, so now we're going to go into our final method. And this is more of a method that can be used for any single type of note-taking, which is going to be creating shorthand and abbreviations. It's a very time-effective way to take notes. You probably are already using some of these elements in your note-taking. Some of the more common examples are going to be the and sign, the plus sign, equals, and percent. Some of the more common abbreviations are going to be POP for population, SUBJ for subject, and PPL for people. Initials is going to be United States of America, and it's going to be the USA. And a lot of other common examples are B/C and W/O, which stands for because and without. Whenever you're creating shorthand, you can create a smaller sentence. You may originally have 3 or 4 lines of text, and you could probably get it down into maybe 1 or 2, especially when that professor is just talking so fast. Using some of those shorthand is really going to help you out. Whenever you're reading over your notes, it helps condense them so you're not reading through pages upon pages of notes. It helps you keep your brain engaged as well, and make sure that you have time to actually actively listen and learn and absorb all of your information.
Awesome. And that concludes our presentation today. So if you do have any questions after watching this video, feel free to send us an email. Give us your questions. We've listed our website information, our location, as well as our emails. You're also welcome to follow us on social media. We would love to have more followers and hear what you have to say. This last slide here is all of our work cited. And that is where we'll conclude. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was fun to go over this with you. And again, please reach out if you have any questions or comments or just want to check in.